Well, it's never easy to transition from one moment to another, but we are going to do that and jump into our sermon today. And like I said, I just want to say on the front end, this is a bit of a heavier sermon because we're going to be looking at the turning point in David's story where things don't quite work out for him. And we're going to be looking at a series of choices that David makes and the weight of those choices. And the reality is we as humans have been given the ability to choose. And those choices, they matter. And so they hold weight. They have implications. And so my daughter, who's 6, she's really beginning to feel the reality of this. Because as she gets older, we try to include her more in our decisions or let her choose. And so as many of you know, school starts tomorrow. Imogen's going to be a first grader tomorrow. And to celebrate school starting, we asked Imogen the other day, all right, Imogen, we're going to get ice cream to celebrate that school is starting. And you could get ice cream here, or you could get ice cream here. Where do you want to go? You get to choose. You would have thought that we were the worst parents in the world because Imogen literally melted down in the middle of the kitchen and started weeping. And I'm like, what did I do wrong? What happened? And she looks at me, she goes, it's just too many good choices and I don't know which one to make. And I'm like, do you want me to choose for you? But, it mattered where she went to ice cream. And the truth is our choices, they matter because they shape our lives, right? They shape our lives. What you choose to pursue for your work, where you choose to live, who you choose to be in relationships with, whether you choose to have children or not, all of these things, they shape our lives. They set our lives in a trajectory. Our choices have a weight to them. But just as much as our choices can shape our lives, our choices also have the power to break our lives. Dallas Willard says it like this: choice is where sin dwells. Choice is where sin dwells. And we are going to see the reality of that in David's life today. And then reflecting on David's life, we will see the reality of that in our own lives. So if you have a Bible with you, we are going to be in 2 Samuel chapters 11 and 12. But I want to set the story up a little bit for us, give us some context. So up until this point, David has been the hero of the story, right? Little David, the runt of the litter, gets picked over all of his brothers to be king. Little David defeats Goliath. David is faithful to Saul, even when Saul is unfaithful to him. David keeps choosing the ways of God over and over and over again. And then we get to this point in the story, and this is considered the turning point in his story and also the turning point in Israel's story. Israel is the people of God that David has been anointed to lead. And he's supposed to be the one who leads them in the ways of the Lord. And this turns everything upside down because David makes a series of choices that break his life and also eventually end up breaking the nation of Israel. So let's look at the choices that David makes. So first, in verse 1 in chapter 11 in 2 Samuel, says this: in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. Okay, this seems almost like a throwaway line, but it's actually super important. Because what we're told is it's the springtime, and this is when kings go and lead people off into war, go and lead their armies. But David sent Joab to do that. Sends the king's army with Joab, who's the commander of the army, and it says David remained in Jerusalem. But that word in the Greek actually says David sat in Jerusalem. So David has chosen not to be where he is supposed to be, and not to do what he's supposed to be doing. And we don't know why he made this choice. Scriptures don't tell us, but they're very clear in the language. David is making a bad choice. David has responsibilities, he has a role to play, and David is choosing not to do that. And in fact, David, in making this choice, he's choosing this way of neglect and negligence and laziness. Because it's going to tell us David awakens in the evening, which means David has been sleeping all day long. right? So it's not like David's like, I got some stuff to do in Jerusalem. I'm going to stay back, get some work to do. David's just lounging about in Jerusalem. And so the first choice that David makes is to not do what he's supposed to be doing. That's his first choice, to be somewhere that he's not supposed to be. That's the first choice, and it sets the whole thing up. So let's look at David's second choice. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers to get her. She came to him, and he slept with her. Okay, this is part of the story that often gets misinterpreted. So David, he's awoken from his afternoon nap, and he, rather than being on the front lines where he's supposed to be, he decides, I'm going to go up on the roof, and I'm just going to see all that I'm in charge of. He's just up there looking around. And how we typically have read this or heard this is, and then he sees a lady bathing on the top of her roof, right? There she is on the roof bathing. That is not what the scriptures say. The scriptures say, from the roof, David sees a woman bathing. It is from the vantage point of David that he is able to see this, right? So this is not a relationship. Like David and Bathsheba is not some sordid relationship that's been building and they've really connected and now suddenly they have this moment where they're alone. This is, David is up where he's not supposed to be and he sees someone and he desires that person. And David doesn't know Bathsheba. He doesn't know who she is. He doesn't know her name. David actually never uses her name in this entire passage. And when David sees her, desires her, and then he asks about her, it says David sent messengers to get her. They brought her to him. He took her and he laid with her. What's very clear that the author is laying out here is that David is completely in control of this situation. This is not a mutual situation here. Bathsheba is a woman in a patriarchal society, and the king has sent for her. Her husband is off at war. She can't say, sorry, I'm busy. Like, she has no choice here. So David, the verbs are very clear. David is in control of this. Now, there has been a spectrum of how this has been understood. At the best for David, he is an adulterer, and he's abusing his power as king. He's using his power of position to take advantage of this situation. At worst, people have named David a rapist. I will let you choose where you put him on that spectrum. But what we are very clear is that the second choice that David makes is he takes something that is not his to take. He uses his power and his authority and his position because he sees something that he wants and he takes it. So that's the second choice that David makes. But then David gets some news. Bathsheba is pregnant, right? So he hears that she's pregnant, and so David makes a third choice. Upon hearing this, so he sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. That is Bathsheba's husband. And Joab sent him to David, and when Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, and how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. And then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. Okay, that seems like what? So it's important to know that feet in the Old Testament is a euphemism. Feet don't mean feet. So when David says, hey, just called you back because I wanted to hear how's Joab doing and everyone else. And by the way, you should go spend some quality time with your wife. Sounds like a good idea. Just want to get an update. So, and he even sends a gift ahead of Uriah to entice them, right? Because he's got this idea, if I can get Uriah to come back from the war, sleep with his wife, no one will know that I'm the father of the baby. Done. Because they've committed adultery. The penalty is death, both for David and for Bathsheba. The king is not exempt from that, right? So David is very aware of the consequence of his decision. And so he comes up with this whole plan, go wash your feet. And Uriah doesn't do it. Uriah sleeps in the servants' quarter. And David calls him back. He's like, what's the deal, Uriah? Like, come on, you're home. Go see Bathsheba. And this is what Uriah says. The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents. And my commander Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. So Uriah says, well, that's not right. I mean, everyone else is in tents. We're at war. It would make him ceremonially unclean as well. So like Uriah's like, this is the wrong thing. I'm not going to do that. So David thinks, oh, okay, well, stay a couple extra nights and eat and drink with me. And so he gets Uriah drunk because he assumes, oh, if I get him drunk, then like all this goody two-shoes stuff is going to go away and he'll do what I need. But he doesn't. Uriah does get intoxicated, but he continues to make the right choice. And so the third choice that David makes is he chooses manipulation and deceit over being honest, over confession, over naming what he's done. He says, I'm going to try to work this situation to my advantage. That does not work out for him. And so we see that David makes a final choice. And we're told this. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In it, he wrote, put Uriah out in front where the fighting is fiercest. Then withdraw from him so he will be struck down and die. And so David, between the evening and the morning, decides this thing isn't resolving itself, and so I know what I'll do. I will get rid of Uriah. So he sends Uriah, who he knows is going to choose to do the right thing, who is an honest man. He sends him back with his own death warrant, assuming that Uriah is such a good guy, he's not going to open up this letter that's not addressed to him. And Joab fulfills this. He puts Uriah actually in a place that's really defended, along with a whole bunch of other men, and a whole bunch of them die to fulfill the king's wishes. And so the fourth choice that David makes is murder. The fourth choice is David says, my life and my wants and my comfort are more important than yours. And it looks like David gets away with the whole thing. You know, Uriah's gone. He takes Bathsheba as his wife. They have the baby. It all seems to be like, got it, covered it up, good. Until we get to verse 27. We get to verse 27, and it says, right at the end, but the thing David had done displeased the Lord. And the word displeased doesn't quite capture what the Greek says. The Greek actually says the thing that David had done was evil in the eyes of the Lord. See, up until this point, David's been in charge of this story. David's the one who chose to stay back. David's the one who saw Bathsheba, sent people to get her, took her, and then he also sent for Uriah, sent Uriah back. David's been the one orchestrating this whole thing. And he assumes he's gotten away with it. But we remember back in week 1, Josh talked about how when Samuel is sent to go anoint a king, right, and all of David's brothers show up, and he sees all these strapping men, and he's like, oh, it's got to be that one, or it's got to be that one. Like, these guys look like a king. And God says to Samuel, oh, no. You're looking with your eyes, but I see the heart. So this is a God who we've already been told sees the heart. And so it doesn't matter how much David has done to deceive everyone else with the externals. God sees what David has done. He is aware, and he names it as evil. And so then God takes control of the action of the story. See, up until this point, David's been doing all the sending. But God sends Nathan, and Nathan is a prophet. And Nathan comes to David with this story. And he tells him this story in chapter 12. There were 2 men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, and the poor man had nothing except one little lamb he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food and drank his cup and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity." So David hears this story about a lamb and he is outraged. This is crazy. How could anyone be so cruel? How could anyone do something so terrible? This guy should die and pay 4 times restitution. And then we get to one of the most dramatic moments of Scripture ever. Nathan looks at him in the eye and goes, "You are that man. You are the man. It is you." And David, in this moment, comes face to face with his own sin. David, in this moment, is forced to see what happens because after Nathan says, "You're that man," he starts to speak on behalf of God, and he says this. "This is what the Lord of Israel says. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you the house of Israel and Judah, and if all of this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own." And Nathan lays out, here are the consequences of what is going to happen because of your decision. He says, the sword will never leave your house, and the son that you had with Bathsheba, this son is going to die. And these actually do play out. David's son dies, and we have to ask, did God kill David's son just to make a point? Right? And some people say yes. Some people say God is God. He gives life and takes it away. He's able to do that. Another line of thinking is that this begins, like I said, this is the turning point for David and for Israel. And when Israel is formed, Moses, who brought them out of Egypt and brought them through the desert and brings them into this promised land that they're now dwelling in, he says, before you go in, I got to tell you something. There's 2 ways that you can go. There's 2 paths you can walk. There's the path of blessing. And if you walk the path of blessing, it means you follow the ways of God, you obey his commands, you stay close to him, you will have divine protection over you. You will be protected from your enemies and from death and sickness. God will be with you and close. And when God is close, these things that are evil, they don't have the same power. Right? Choose the way of blessing. And up until this point in Israel's story, David has been choosing the way of blessing. And suddenly, because Moses says there's another way, if you choose to live against the way that God wants you to live and break his commands and break his law and break this covenant relationship, you are choosing the way of curse. And when you choose the way of curse, God's divine protection withdraws. And when God's protection withdraws, these things that he's able to divinely keep at bay, they come rushing in. And so many scholars argue that in this moment, the death of David's son marks that shift between blessing to curse. That Israel has now chosen the way of curse because David has chosen the way of curse. And he's told, the sword that you have unleashed, it will never leave your house. The violence that you have chosen, it will ripple out from this decision, and it does. So right after this incident, Amnon, David's son, rapes David's daughter, Tamar, and ruins Tamar's life. And then David's other son, Absalom, is so infuriated, and David does nothing. And so Absalom decides to take matters into his own hands, and he kills Amnon. And then Absalom raises up against David, and David has to flee for a while, and the kingdom is ripped apart. And then Joab ends up killing Absalom, and you just see violence after violence after violence, and it just keeps going. It never ends. David has introduced the way of the curse. And what happens is this breaks the nation of Israel, where they end up in a civil war with one another. And all of this, because when Israel wanted a king, they kept saying, like, God, we really want a king. We want to be like everyone else. Everyone else is a king. We want a king. God kept saying, you don't want a king. Trust me, you don't want a king. Because a king isn't going to make the same choices that I make. A king is not going to be as good as I am. No, we want a king. Because in this way, this communal thinking, the way of the king is the way of the nation. And so if the king is following the path of blessing, the whole nation follows the path of blessing. But if the king follows the way of the curse, the whole nation does. And that's what happens in this moment. And everything breaks. David's choices break everything. So David has had to come face to face with his own sin. And we hear that word sin, and for some of you, that word makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of meaning to that, and there's others of you who are like, I don't really know what that means. The word sin means to miss the mark, but I think Francis Spearford puts it better. He says, it's the human propensity to mess things up. He uses some more colorful language, but we're going to clean that up for church this morning. So it's the human propensity to mess things up, to make a mess of things. And this is what he says about that. It's our active inclination, and just stop right there because it's really important. He's saying it's an active inclination, something that we do to break stuff. Stuff here including moods, promises, relationships we care about, and our own well-being and other people's, as well as material objects whose high gloss positively seems to invite a big, fat scratch. He's saying is we have this active inclination in which we see something and we choose to make a mess of it. And David's choices really resemble the same types of choices that we make when we make a mess of things in our own lives. That first choice, to neglect what he is supposed to be doing. If we think about our own messes, it's often that we are neglecting something, that we're not where we're supposed to be, we're not attending to what we're supposed to be attending to, we're not doing something that we're supposed to be doing. His second choice of taking what is not his, how often is the mess that shows up in our life because we felt entitled to something that wasn't ours. And we took it at whatever expense that was. That third choice, to use manipulation and deceit rather than honesty. How often have we made a mess of things because we think, I don't want anyone to know what I've done, so I'm going to keep trying to cover it up and move people and manipulate them, and maybe they won't see it. And it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. So I can't watch Meet the Parents. That's the worst movie ever. You're like, just be honest. And then that fourth choice, and it doesn't result in physical murder on our end, but that valuing my own life and my own comfort and my own desires and my own want over yours. I matter more than you when it comes down to it. When we think about that, those are the same four choices that we are prone to make, and it messes everything up. And we all have this within us. And so Francis Spearford says we have this appointment of realization, where we have to see that this is true. And sometimes it's dramatic, like David, my whole life is broken. And sometimes it's more subtle, and he paints this great picture of this subtle appointment of realization. He says this: you're lying in the bath and you notice that you're 39, and the way you're living bears scarcely any resemblance to what you think you've always wanted. Yet you got here by choice, by a long series of choices for things which at any one moment temporarily outbid the things you say you wanted most. And as the water cools, you glimpse an unflattering vision of yourself as a being whose wants make no sense, don't harmonize, whose desires deep down are discordantly arranged. So we have to come face to face with this unflattering vision of ourselves. This ability to choose that which is not best for us, or that which is not best for others. And I had a mentor who used to say, oh, the gospel is very good news. It's very good news. It just feels like really bad news at first. Because you have to start there with this unflattering vision of yourself. And so Francis Spearford again says this about the gospel: all bad news And it's not very welcome, this unflattering vision of ourselves. And if you let yourself, especially if you let yourself take seriously the implication that we actually want the destructive things we do, that they are not just an accident that keeps happening to poor little us, but part of our nature, that we are truly cruel as well as tender. We would, on the whole, very much like this not to be true, and our culture conspires to help us avoid and defer and ignore the sting of it as much as possible. See, this is the power of David's story. He shows us that sin is not just something that happens to us. I read recently that Christians are very comfortable talking about brokenness and their own brokenness, but it's almost always in reference to how they have been wounded, how someone else has hurt me. This is my brokenness. And not our ability to break our own lives and break the lives of others. That we have the ability to choose that. But the reality is the gospel says sin and brokenness isn't something that just happens to you. It is something that is a part of you. It is something that you can choose out of and live out of. And that's the problem. I mean, how many television shows have you watched where it's like there's this perfectly great relationship that finally gets together and then someone makes a really terrible decision to mess the whole thing up, right? And we eat that up. We're like, oh, now there's drama here. And there's something in us that is drawn to making a mess of things when things break and our own ability to break things. And remember, sin is not the feelings of temptation, right? It wasn't that David was up on the roof and saw Bathsheba and desired her that was the sin. It's David makes a series of choices on acting on that inclination. Remember, choice is where sin dwells. David chooses to not be where he's supposed to be. David chooses to take Bathsheba as his own. David chooses deceit, and David chooses murder. He chooses those, and that is the problem. But many of us, we don't want to look at the choices that we make. We don't actually want to acknowledge that there is a component of choice, that I have a component of responsibility, that I'm an agent in my own life. We deceive ourselves to think this just happened to me. So a few years back, I was at another church, and it was a Sunday morning, and a young woman had come into church. She didn't regularly attend there, and she was distraught. And so she thought, this person needs to talk to a pastor. So they found me, and we connected. I brought her into my office, and I said, can you tell me what's going on? Help me understand where all of this is coming from. And she lays out this very long story about how she's been in an affair with one of her professors over the last year. And that morning, she was on the brink of feeling like, I need to end this. This isn't the right thing. I need to stop this. And so we started talking about it. But you could see her going back and forth and justifying, but his marriage is a mess. And, we connect so well. And I think we might be soulmates. And I had to say, I need to stop you. I need to stop you right now and talk about what I'm hearing. Because the reality is, it doesn't matter the state of his marriage, and it doesn't matter how well you connect, and it doesn't matter how much you enjoy one another. This man has made a vow to another person, and you are in a relationship that you have no business being in. You have inserted yourself into a marriage that you have no business being in. And it doesn't matter how much he calls you and tells you how lonely he is, or how miserable he is, or that he's going to leave his wife, or that you're his person. It doesn't matter. You are choosing a relationship that is wrong, and you need to choose to end it. I wish I could tell you that was like a eureka moment for this young girl, and that she was like, you're right, I'm done. But as we talked, and I said, if you want to talk more about this, if you, I am here, call me, email me, stop in, prayed for her. But as she left, I could tell she's going to keep choosing this relationship. But in her mind, she's built up this whole story that it's just I don't have any control here. It's just something that's happened to me that I found myself in, rather than saying, I am choosing to be in a relationship that is wrong. And maybe this morning there is a series of choices that you have not wanted to look at in your own life? That if you actually stopped and looked at it, you'd realize this didn't just happen to me and I didn't just fall into this. And so maybe it is your marriage. Maybe you're not at a point where you're having an affair, but you've given into resentment and you've given into eye rolling, or you've given in to just being frosty to one another. That's a choice. It doesn't just happen. Or maybe you're at the point where you've started to confide in someone else. Almost every physical affair starts in an emotional affair, where you found, I actually connect better with this person, and so I'm going to start telling them my troubles rather than my spouse. Or maybe you are in that position where you have chosen to be in an extramarital affair. And this is the best way that I've ever heard affairs framed, is every marriage, even the best marriage, a great marriage, is only going to fulfill about 80% of your wants and desires. About 80%. No marriage, doesn't matter how great it is, going to fulfill 100% of your wants and desires. 80%. Where affairs come along is someone offers this 20%. Right? So you're like, yeah, my husband, he's steady and he pays the bills and he's really kind and he's super supportive, but he never plans fun surprises and vacations and buys me big presents. And someone comes along and says, here's the fun that you've been missing. Here's the 20%. The 20% is a blast. And people ditch the 80% for the 20%, and then they realize after a little bit, I'm only left with 20%, and I lost the 80%. And then they keep jumping to find the 20% over and over and over again. Maybe that's where you find yourself today. That didn't just happen to you. No one just falls into an affair. It is a series of choices that we make. Maybe it's your job. Maybe you've gotten to this place where you're like, I don't like my job. And so rather than actually dealing with what you don't like about it, or maybe there was an interaction that if you were honest or you worked through it, it could be a great job, but you've just decided, I'm going to go find another job. Maybe that's been your pattern, right? Once I don't like this, I'm going to do this. And once I don't like that, I'm going to do this. Or, maybe you're still in the job, but you've checked out. Just going to do the bare minimum, cash my paycheck. I don't care about this place. Apathy doesn't just happen to us. We choose it. Or maybe you are so angry with your place of employment that you've started skimming off the top. You're like, well, I am entitled to this. I deserve more than what they are giving me, and so I'm going to take what's mine. Those are all a series of choices. Maybe it's your health. You know you need to stop smoking. You know that you're overeating. Maybe you're in the throes of an eating disorder. All of these, there are choices that are made along this line. None of these things just happen to us. And so when it comes to sin, we can deceive ourselves. And again, I think children are the best mirror to our own inclination. So my daughter, again, who's 6, we've been working through this idea of taking responsibility for your bad choices. And the other day she was at a friend's house playing, and she made a series of bad choices that ended in the play date not ending very well. And the other parent let us know what had happened. And Imogen came home and she was really upset. And so we wanted to talk to her about what happened? Did you do this? And she just couldn't even, I didn't do any of those things and it's not my fault. And as a parent, your first inclination is to bring the hammer down, right? You are going to take responsibility for your bad choices. Let me tell you why. But luckily I've had enough training to be well, that's not probably going to be an effective route. So, because she just couldn't take responsibility. So defensive, so upset. And so I decided, well, I'll take her to Starbucks, which some of you parents are like, oh, see, there's a problem, right? Entitled. But I decided, all right, I'm going to take her to Starbucks. I'm going to buy her hot chocolate. We're going to sit down, let her calm down a little bit. And over her hot chocolate, I said, hey, can we talk about what happened at your friend's house? I don't want to talk about it. And I said, Imogen, there's a thing called being defensive. Do you know what that word means? She doesn't know what that word means. So I said, think about it like this. Defensive is kind of like you put a fence up between you and something else because it feels too scary to look at the thing on the other side. And as soon as I said that, Imogen broke into tears in the middle of the Starbucks. And she's like, I just don't want to say that I did those because I just feel so bad that I did those things. I said, yeah, it feels really bad when you look at your bad choices. It feels really bad for me when I look at my bad choices. That feels so bad. And that's the challenge for us, is we get defensive because we don't want to feel how bad it feels to look at our bad choices. And so now I've walked you into the depths of here's all the bad choices that you've probably been making. And you're like, what do I do with this? And I was telling Josh, thanks a lot. Last week you did a dance and a light show, and I get to be like, here's all that junk about life. You're welcome. No dance today, sorry. This is where we have to come back to David, because David actually makes another choice that helps us when we get into this place. See, when Nathan comes to David and he says, you are that man, David has another choice to make. See, most of the kings that follow David, you know what they do when the prophets come and say, you're that man, this is what you're doing? They kill the prophet. Now, I don't want to hear that. I don't like what you have to say. David, when Nathan confronts him, says, I am that man. And he puts the fence down, and he actually admits to what he has done. And David, in this, because we have to ask, David is continually framed as a man after God's own heart. David is a man after God's own heart. And you think, okay, how is a murderer, a liar, an adulterer a man after God's own heart? That doesn't make any sense. Right? That doesn't make any sense. This guy is terrible. He's broken 3 of the commandments in one fell swoop, right? How is that? Well, being a man after God's own heart is not that David's heart and David's decisions perfectly mirror God's heart and God's decisions. Is that David, in all of his brokenness, knows the heart of God and chooses to pursue it. See, David, in the midst of this situation, he composes Psalm 51. In a little bit, we're going to read Psalm 51 together. But in Psalm 51, David both looks at what he has done and names it honestly and confesses who God is in the midst of that. Some of the things that he says in this about what he has done: have mercy on me, wash me clean from my guilt. I recognize my rebellion. It haunts me day and night. I have done what is evil in your sight. David takes the fence down and says, all of those things, I am that man. That's me. And he can do that because he doesn't fear punishment from God. He knows the heart of God is to restore and to forgive and to reconcile. Some of the things he says about God, he talks about God's unfailing love and God's great compassion. He says, restore to me the joy of your salvation. Wash me and I will be whiter than snow. You don't desire me to make a big sacrifice. What you want is a broken heart over what I have done, because you will restore that. David chooses to pursue the heart of God in his own brokenness. And that is the same choice that we get to make. See, yes, choice is the dwelling of sin, but it is also the dwelling place of righteousness. And that's the thing about choice. You get to choose. You get to choose which way you go. You get to choose in your own brokenness. Do I keep the fence up because it just feels too bad to look at it? I don't want to actually name it, and I don't want to take responsibility for it? Or do we lower the fence saying, yeah, I might still have to live with the natural consequences of my decision. David still has to live with the natural consequences of his decisions, right? Confession doesn't just magically make the mess go away. But David knows that, well, the natural consequences may play out, the eternal consequences of these decisions, there is healing there, that God wants to restore our relationship, that God wants to bring us back into right living so that we don't keep making those choices over and over and over and over again, that we have the ability to choose differently. See, Dallas Willard says it like this: the initial move towards Christ-likeness cannot be towards self-esteem. because of confusion about what self-esteem means, and because realistically, I'm not okay and you're not okay. We're all in serious trouble. This must be our starting point. And when we do that, when we actually say, I'm not okay and you're not okay and we're all in serious trouble, and we need to come before God and say, I have made a series of choices that have broken my life and the life of those around me. And God, I need help. I need you to restore me. David, in his psalm, understands the heart of God, but this is most seen clearly in the person of Jesus. Jesus, who has come to lay his life down, to reconcile us, to bring us into right relationship with God, so that we can start to live in a way that we are not at mercy of this human propensity to mess things up, but we can start to make different choices, that we can choose the way of love, that we can choose the way of righteousness. And so as we close here this morning, I want you to take a moment. I want you to take an inventory of your life. And maybe you will have the courage to take that fence down. The one that you've put up to say, this just seems to just happen to me. Just found myself here. And you take the fence down, and you can actually look at it and say, I have made a series of choices that have brought me here. Not every situation. There are some situations where you are just a victim. That is true. But they are few and far between. More often than not, the brokenness in our life, we are playing some part in it. Maybe you can hold that out before God. And as I read Psalm 51 over us, and the words will be on the screen as well, maybe you can let these words wash over you, and they can become your words. Your moment to choose to pursue the heart of God in the midst of brokenness, trusting that God, even though you're not okay and I'm not okay and we're all in serious trouble, God has come to do something about that. So here's Psalm 51. Have mercy on me, O God, because of your unfailing love. Because of your great compassion, blot out the stain of my sins. Wash me clean from my guilt. Purify me from my sin. For I recognize my rebellion. It haunts me day and night. Against you and you alone have I sinned. I have done what is evil in your sight. You will be proved right in what you say, and your judgment against me is just, for I was born a sinner. Yes, from the moment my mother conceived me. But you desire honesty from the womb, teaching me wisdom even there. Purify me from my sins, and I will be clean. Wash me, and I will be whiter than snow. Oh, give me back my joy again. You have broken me. Now let me rejoice. Don't keep looking at my sins. Remove the stain of my guilt. Create in me a clean heart. Oh God, renew a loyal spirit within me. Do not banish me from your presence, and don't take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and make me willing to obey you. You do not desire a sacrifice, or I would offer one. You do not want a burnt offering. The sacrifice you desire is a broken spirit. You will not reject a broken and repentant heart, oh God. Let us pray. God, you know where each one of us is, and you know the choices that we have made to get us there. And you know the thing that maybe we've been keeping a fence up around ourselves so we don't have to see it. And God, I pray that we would be able to receive your mercy this morning, that we would know that your heart is one to reconcile and forgive. And God, that you would set us free, that you would help us to take a step towards you, knowing that you alone can give us the power to live differently, to stop that active inclination to make a mess of things, and to actually be embraced by you and to be changed. Thank you, Jesus, that you gave up everything to make a way for us. We love you and we praise you in Jesus' name.